Hey y'all, welcome. I'm going to give everybody just a couple of minutes to hop on before we get started tonight. If you are joining me already, welcome. Leave me a comment and let me know where are you joining from. And I am going to make sure all of my settings and everything are ready to go. Hi, welcome. We're going to get started here in just a second. Thank you for joining me tonight. Okay, we're going to just dive right in and get started. Tonight I'm going to be talking about one of my most frequently asked questions, and that is, how do I implement and teach vocabulary instruction in my math block? If you've followed me for a while, you probably know, yes, I have a huge passion for mathematics, but I also have a passion for teaching vocabulary and improving vocabulary instruction. And so a lot of the times, implementing and focusing on mathematical vocabulary is kind of not necessarily put to the back burner, but it's not, a lot of teachers think that it's not necessarily as important as mastering the skill. Whereas in ELA, there's a heavy focus on vocabulary. And so there should be that same type of focus within your math block, but a lot of teachers they don't know how to do that. So tonight I'm going to be sharing some vocabulary strategies and tips and things that I have done within my own classroom. Actually, what I'm going to do is I have a session with SDE where I talk about mathematical comprehension strategies, and vocabulary is one of them. So what I'm actually going to do, I'm going to do it a little bit different. I'm actually going to share my slides from that vocabulary session of that presentation. So that way you can kind of see a visual representation as well as hearing me speak. So we're just going to dive in and get started. But before we do, let me know in the comments, I want to know, do you focus on vocabulary within your math block now? Or, do you just kind of, you introduce the words and you move on? Do you ever reteach or use any kind of strategies to continually practice those words? So even if you don't, that's okay, but let me know in the comments, and then we'll come back to that a little bit later. Alright, so we're just going to dive in and get started. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, and because I'm sharing a PowerPoint, I'm obviously doing this live, I cannot make my PowerPoint full screen where you don't see the thumbnails over here. So I know that they're there. I'm going to kind of shrink them a little bit so that they're not quite so obvious. And so just kind of pretend that that those are not there. Okay, I'm jumping ahead of myself here. So tonight we're going to be talking all about vocabulary and instruction, why it's important, and then we're going to talk about, there are 3 different types of vocabulary words within mathematical concepts, and then I'm going to show you some effective strategies that I have used in my own classroom to implement and reinforce vocabulary throughout the year. So if you are not already familiar with Marzano's 6 steps to vocabulary instruction, I highly recommend them. These 6 steps, they are often used a lot, within an ELA format, but they can also be used in a mathematical format as well. I actually have a whole blog series all about these 6 steps of vocabulary instruction. It's more geared towards ELA, but it can definitely be beneficial to you if you only teach math. So you can definitely head on over to saddleupforsecondgrade.com to check that out. So these are the 6 research-based steps based on Marzano's vocabulary instruction. They are, number 1, describe and explain. Number 2, restate and explain in using their own words. That's a big thing with any type of vocabulary is you want to make sure you don't want to just give students a dictionary definition and expect them to understand what they're, expect them to understand what it means. Allow them to explain concepts or terms in their own words so that they can have a better understanding of what's being taught. Number 3 is create a drawing or a representation. Number 4 is explaining knowledge. Number 5 is collaborating with others. And number 6 would be involved with play. That would be games or math stations or things like that. So now tonight I'm not going to go too deep in, I'm not going to go too deep into these 6 steps of instruction, but I am going to kind of briefly go, I'm going to kind of briefly hit a few of them. Okay, excuse me, sorry, I got a tickle in my throat. Okay, so I love this quote. I'm not going to read the full thing out loud, but I think that as teachers, we should know that it is so important to, whenever you're introducing vocabulary, whether it be a new term or maybe a term that they've previously heard, think about what they already know. So I'm going to go ahead and read this anyway. It says, to effectively teach mathematical vocabulary, consider what foundational knowledge should they already know to understand the terms being taught and how they will be assessed. This came from directly from Marzano's website. And so with all of that being said, this kind of leads into, there are 3 different types of words to teach within vocabulary instruction. Type 1, these are going to be words that are already in students' like oral language. They can easily recognize them in print. They already know what they mean. And those are going to be simple terms such as like how, many, and more. Then you have words that they might not be in students' oral vocabulary, like they might not use them on a regular basis, but they are going to know kind of what they mean, or they're somewhat familiar with them. And then the last one, or the last type of words, are going to be words that these are going to be students they are not familiar with. They are going to be related to new concepts that they might be learning that school year. So for example, here you can see on this slide, I put area, array, regrouping. Especially in 2nd grade, kids, they're really not familiar with those terms. So, keep in mind that when looking over your mathematical vocabulary that goes along with your lesson, think about, okay, which tier does it fall in? Is it 1, 2, or 3? And then you can decide what kind of instruction needs to be used with those words. You might have 2 or 3 words that your kids are already going to be really familiar with, and you don't need to review or practice as much. Whereas these new terms that students are less familiar with, they're going to need more exposure to them. So just keep those things in mind. So one of the things that I do very frequently with my class was I used a graphic organizer when introducing vocabulary words. This is just a simple 4-square organizer. You've probably seen it a lot in an ELA model where students have to write the definition of a word. They draw a picture or that visual representation, and then in an ELA format, you might do a synonym or an antonym, or using it in a sentence. Whereas in a mathematical format, you are going to use a picture, the definition, an example or non-example, or excuse me, an example and a non-example. So I always kept it very simple. So really kind of from the beginning of the year, I would actually teach my students how to draw, you can see here, how to draw a 4-square model, a 4-square graphic organizer. And so what they would do is they would write the vocabulary term here over to the side. So this was vocabulary for telling time. So we did a box for AM, PM, and then this is the hour hand. And so the first box was always the picture, followed by the definition, which they could create their own definition or their own words, or they could write one that we came up with as a group. And then we would do an example and a non-example. So you can see here, for this example, for a picture for AM, they drew a picture of the sun. They defined it as early in the morning before noon. An example, they wrote breakfast and math. And then a non-example, they put PE and dance. And so to this particular student, that was their non-example. They did not have PE and they did not go to dance class in the morning. So you can see here we did the same thing for PM and for the hour hand. And then here is my example, one that I had done for 2D shapes. And so again, we would just write the title across the top. We would draw our 4-square organizer. We would write the vocabulary word over here onto the side, and then we would draw a picture, write a definition, give an example, and a non-example. And so what you can do, guys, you don't have to complete this entire graphic organizer for every single word. You can just kind of start and, okay, so maybe on day 1, once these terms are introduced, you might just, okay, you're going to create a 4-square organizer for every word. And then on day 1, you're only going to have them just draw the picture. We're going to draw the picture for every vocabulary word. So here for this 2D example, or this 2D shape example, they would just draw the shapes that they're going to be learning about. Then on day 2, you can come in and you can go over and review definitions, and then kids can write the definition in their own words. Then day 3, you might come up with examples of that particular word, and then on day 4, they would do an example or a non-example of that word. So you don't have to complete the entire graphic organizer for every single word in one day. That's going to take up too much time. And so eventually, once you kind of start this and your kids get the hang of things and the routine of things, they will actually be able to complete these organizers themselves. I mean, once they especially if it's a concept that they're already somewhat familiar with. So once they have the picture and the definition, they could do this activity as a math station, and they could have to come up with an example and a non-example during their math station time, where they're doing that independently, and so then that way it's not taking up your whole group instruction time. This is something that can be done during small groups that's not going to take up a lot of time. So again, this is just something, it's very simple and it's easy for students to understand. So I actually also have this printable version. If you are interested in this 4-square organizer, I'm going to give it to you guys for free. So I was having a little bit of trouble with my download link earlier today. I'm working on having that fixed. So if you are interested in the download link where you can grab this organizer for your classroom, if it's not linked in the description, just leave me a comment and I will drop the link where you can go to download this to use in your own classroom. Let me grab another drink real quick. Okay. All right, another valuable strategy that you can do with your students is pocket chart sorts. I talk about these all the time. This picture example is from one of my guided math units. In my units, you're going to see lots of these things. Pocket chart sorts are going to help students distinguish the characteristics that define a concept, and especially if it's something that can involve pictures. That's going to be highly beneficial for your ESL students. Having that visual representation to where they can put a picture to a word to a concept. So this is just one example. Obviously, like, you don't have to have like a pre-printed version like this. This just is a visual example of these are polygons. So these specific cards here, these are polygons. These cards over here, these are not polygons. So you can do this with shapes. You can do it with types of coins. You can do it with place value blocks, time, all different, all kinds of concepts that, your kids can use or practice throughout the year. So once something like this is done whole group, then take this same activity and put it into a math station where kids are still, they don't realize that here with this activity that they're practicing vocabulary with the term polygon. They don't realize that. So using pocket chart sorts, these are just they make great whole group lessons, and then they're great for repurposing to use during math stations and small groups as well. All right, this next one, this is actually one of my favorite games to play with students, and it is called Mile a Minute. So what you do is you're gonna put your kids into teams, and then up on the board or on a piece of paper or, somewhere that your kids can see, you're gonna provide a list of words related to that concept. So then you are going to call on a student to come up to the front, and they're going to begin randomly reading those aloud. And then the first team to guess the concept that is related to those particular vocabulary words, then that team gets a point. So I've done this several different ways. You can do like this here. You can put all the words up on the screen at one time, and you can have the kid come up and read them out loud. Or you could just pull up like a blank PowerPoint, or have words written on index cards, and you're just going to show like only one word at a time instead of them all being on display like you see here. So if I was to read these words out loud, let me know in the comments, what concept do you think I am talking about? So vertice, side, regular, compose, irregular, polygon, decompose, quadrilateral. And so as kids are reading this out loud, then the teams that are sitting down, they are trying to guess. They're trying to be the team that guesses the concept first. So obviously this would be 2D shapes with geometry. And so then the first team to guess that would get a point. And then you can switch to something else. And so like I said, you can have all the words displayed like this at one time, or you can have them, on index cards or, on a blank PowerPoint and only just show one word at a time. But this is a really fun one, and kids really like it. All right, up next, guys, I have preached this. Oh, I've preached this so much, especially if you remember inside Managing Math Stations. You guys know how important it is to be having mathematical conversations with your students. Because not only, I'm getting ahead of myself here, you might have a kid who they can answer a question correctly on paper, but to have them explain something to really understand what's going on, you're not going to know those things unless you're having mathematical conversations with your students. And so with this, I use Comprehension stems. I keep these on a ring, and I have a set at my small group table as well as up near the front of my classroom, so that I always have them on hand. And so I'm always able to ask my students meaningful questions, during our small group time. Maybe I'm working with a student one-on-one. And so here is just an example. You want to make sure that when you are using comprehension question stems, make sure that you are using the targeted vocabulary word that you want to focus on, make sure that you are including that in your question. So like here my example on the screen says, what does it mean to partition a fraction? So like here on this card example, you might say, why did you partition this shape that way? Why did you partition the square that way? And then ask them to explain their answer and also justify their answer. So make sure that you are having those mathematical conversations with them to see, do they fully understand what these words mean, or are they just guessing on a piece of paper and you have no idea if they really know or not. And then the last thing I am going to share with you guys today is make sure that you have some sort of math word wall in your classroom, or somewhere it can even be in your school. Like this second example here, this is an example. This was a word wall placed in the hallway it was a friend of mine. I have their the school's full permission to use their picture, but they sent me this photo, and they had a math word wall displayed out in the hallway, which I thought was really neat. I really liked that. This was mine, and this was like my second or third classroom, but you can see I had this entire wall here. Everything that was displayed on this wall was related to mathematics. So like over here, I had examples of shapes, and in the middle I had different vocabulary posters, and then our problem solving strategies and things like that. So just make sure, even if you don't have a ton of space, using anchor charts, using those printable visuals, make sure that you have some kind of way. Maybe you can't display all of them at one time, but at least you are able to display what is currently being taught and what is currently being focused on. You just want to make sure that kids have those visuals. So let me see here. Okay, so that's it. That's all I have for math vocabulary today. If you do something else, or if you have a specific game or a routine for introducing vocabulary words in your classroom, drop a comment and let me know. I would love to hear what you do. And obviously, I do a lot more things than what I just showed you. This is just to kind of give you an example and an idea of just a few things. So if you've got any questions at all, drop me a comment and let me know. You can also head on over and join my Saddle Up for Second Grade Teachers Facebook group, and I would love to keep this conversation going inside there. And if you have any questions at all, like I said, leave me a comment, let me know. I just repeated myself, and I'm gonna go. So I hope that you have a great day, and y'all have a blessed one. Bye.